Well, guess what we are going to talk about tonight? Hi, I'm Dan Kingerski on the Pittsburgh Hockey Now platforms, the Facebook and the YouTube. Yep, Kyle Dubas pulled the trigger on Monday, relieving Coach Mike Sullivan of his duties. Let me get the screenshot out. That was, of course, the front page of Pittsburgh Hockey Now. No script, no real direction that I'm going to plan out. We're going to do this a little bit by the seat of our pants because I think there were several converging factors over the last couple of days that led Dubas to the decision. It was the right decision. Now, this is what kind of cracked me up on social media. Of course, one of my trolls came for me. You defended Sullivan all season. Well, yes and no. If you paid attention, I was ripping Sullivan, criticizing him on very specific points throughout the year. I was defending him against things that I thought were wrong. So you take your pick. If I was in Sullivan's back pocket, he sure as hell didn't think so. That's for darn sure. He certainly was not thinking I was in any way, shape, or form his buddy, as some of you intimated. So let's get into, first of all, Kyle Dubas's words. Because what Kyle Dubas talked about, which it kind of made me a little bit mad, isn't the right word, but I'm like, you could have said this. But Kyle Dubas, I mean, don't forget, this is back in January when things were going absolutely sideways. The wheels were coming off. And Dubas said, no, I'm behind our head coach. If we fired Mike Sullivan, we'd be looking for the exact same thing as Mike Sullivan. Well, it turns out he was, in fact, thinking about replacing Mike Sullivan. That part I was like, oh, boy, it's an interesting quandary. Like, okay, like the next time we ask you a question and you say absolutely not, now we all have to downgrade 100% to, let's say, 90% true. Regardless, what Dubas said, and he began to come to the decision because of the lackluster play of the team. He didn't use the word lackluster. But watching the team struggle, fumble, and bumble through a lot of big games, January, February, and even into March, before they sort of turned it around at the end. Watching his team not show up for these games, he began to think, and this was, again, maybe I'm parsing too much, maybe I'm right on target. What Dubas said was, sometimes the class needs a new professor, and here's the part that I started to parse, and sometimes the professor needs a new class. Now, I seized on that mentally right away in the press conference on Monday. And the reason I did, the reason it set off warning bells for me, was because so often this season, I felt like Mike Sullivan was frustrated, not by the situation, but by players. There was certainly, how could you not be disappointed in their performances? I mean, let's be honest. The Penguins were not nearly as bad as their final result. Sullivan's words were often unique or different this season. Here, let me put up Sullivan. And I'm going to explain why I'm nitpicking or being very specific here. Because Sullivan is very good with his words. He knows exactly what he wants to say and exactly when he wants to say it. Perhaps that's maybe why I got the horns more than anybody else, because I would kind of run counter and I would ask questions that took him off narrative or forced him to, address a question where he didn't want to go. Whatever, whether I phrased them poorly, whether I was too confrontational, whether I took him off message, whatever. It matters not now. I was accused, or all those things were discussed with me internally over the last couple or a few years. And Mike Sullivan's modus operandi always was praise the player and then maybe give them a little stick. Maybe lately he's been struggling. But again, his game is at his best when, I know all of Sullivan's sort of setups and benchmarks. This season, however, into this season, when the Philip Tomasinos began to arrive, when the Cody Glasses and these projects, Kevin Hayes, were in the lineup, and we would ask about the performance, his evaluations, his happiness with these players, it was often very specific about what he wasn't getting. And then he would finish it with a compliment. Well, in the case of Tomasino, but he's all in on making it better, or he's all in on getting better, so on and so forth. There's a little something. There was always a little something, a little frustration in that. And I suppose I don't blame him. When you're putting these players out on the ice and you're watching these horrendous, horrific, ghastly, ungodly, terrible, holy moly, what are you thinking sort of mistakes. When you're watching this play, you can't help but say, what the hell are you guys thinking? Although you and I both know Mike Sullivan was not so polite behind closed doors. There were a few times this season. I think all of you know I covered all 82 games, so road and away. There were several times this season when we had to sort of move down further in the hallway of the different arenas we were in. Because, on the road, we essentially gather out in the hallway outside the locker room to talk to Mike Sullivan. There's not a whole lot of amenities for visiting media and not a lot of space. To the point, we had to move down the hallway as to not hear, see a very viscerally angry coach. And so to bring it all full circle to what I mentioned like 2 minutes ago, it feels like. So when Dubas says sometimes the professor needs a new class, that's what exploded in my mind. For all of those reasons, it really, I don't think some of my critics picked it up, but I was increasingly critical of Sullivan through March into April. And then after the season, after Dubas's final press conference, when I really began to fit the puzzle pieces together, I'm still surprised Dubas went through with it. I didn't think it would actually happen until perhaps into next season. When I began to fit the puzzle pieces together, this really was the only move. And it's not because Sullivan lost the team. I don't think he lost it. I do think you could say that the team had become stale. That the team and coach, the fizzy mix no longer was fizzy. There was no longer that spark, that energy. They could go over game plans and details and prepare all they wanted. But here's the stat. I wish I had you know what? I'm not going to be cute. I was going to write down the number 15 and hold it up. 15 times this season, the Penguins allowed a goal on the first shot. Now, how does that reflect on Sullivan? In the words of Alex Nedeljkovic a few months ago, I'm not sure exactly when he said, maybe that was his December rant that sort of sparked the team. And he flatly said, we have to know it's a 7:00 start. We can't keep coming out with these terrible starts, can't keep coming out flat. We can't come out unprepared. That should have been perhaps, I think to people who really wanted this conclusion, yes. It wasn't to me because I know it was a player venting some emotion and frustration. So I didn't feature that part so much. There are other factors. And so, the lack of fizz, shall we say, the incredible lack of commitment and care to defend. I suppose that's a subset of the fizz, but that's also, as Mike Sullivan said in his season-ending press conference, I've got to do a better job of selling them on the commitment to play defense and play the right way. A head coach of 10 years, again, to quote Dubas, in fact, let me pull up his exact quote here. And I probably should share it. Where is it? Mm-hmm. Okay, there it is. Let me bring this up for you guys. There it is. There is the share screen. Okay. My full intention, blah, 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 blah. Give the team a chance to contend and transition to it. I think what I've learned in 2 years is that there's a reason why it is essentially impossible and has not been done where a coach has led a team to winning through a transition and all the way back. And Dubas referenced, a lot of the very close relationships that Mike Sullivan had within the team and the building and the organization. Whether he misunderstood my question or kind of artfully dodged it, I'm not entirely sure. It was pretty plain spoken. My shot in the press conference on Monday was, listen, you mentioned Mike Sullivan's relationships. You also mentioned the team was stagnant and complacent, or you feared them being stagnant and complacent. Do those relationships in any way contribute to the stagnancy and so forth? And, he kind of, he didn't go there. But I think it's a fair assumption, right? It's almost obvious that Sullivan became too entrenched. I think at times he was bewildered by the lack of success. I think at times he assumed that he could push the buttons, and as it has in the past, everything would correct. Obviously, it did not. And I think that's, look, a lot of big-time coaches have that coach ego. I got this. I know best. I know what we're doing. I'm going to do this. It's going to work, period. It works until it doesn't. Even Bill Belichick, eventually had his firing day. There was another couple of things here I want to call your attention to. And that would be, I think, the lack of opportunity for young players. And I say that, and you're like, Dan, you screamed at us for saying he doesn't play young players. Hear me out. I'm going to spin this with a bit of nuance. There was absolutely no truth to the accusation that Sullivan wouldn't play young players. There was absolutely some truth. That's Vasily Ponomarev there, by the way. And I think I added the wrong picture. I had a picture of, there he is. Let me slap Owen up there. Owen Pickering. This is a much better example of what I'm talking about. Because look, Owen Pickering played 25 games in the National Hockey League. Most of them were successful. He was playing pretty well. Towards the end, his play had begun to sort of taper off. He began to look a little bit like a rookie. And the Penguins sent him back to the AHL. I think it was in January. I think it was when we were in Seattle. So it was that West Coast trip, that nightmare of a West Coast trip from late February or late January into February. And on its face, Sullivan was correct. Pickering's play is beginning to slip. We're trying to win games. I can't put him in the lineup quite to the way we want to right now because we're trying to win games. Therefore, it's best to send him down. On the surface, makes complete sense. Now, where it begins to fall apart, and where, as you look back, when you kind of rewind it back, you're telling me that Owen Pickering slipping was any worse than what we had to witness from Ryan Graves, from that horrendous defense, from the time when they traded Marcus Pettersson in January. Good trade, by the way. I'm not questioning the trade. I am saying the fallout was significant to the Penguins roster. That defense went from shaky to unplayable. As a group, unplayable. Worst defense I've ever seen in a Penguins uniform. They were just ungodly. That's where I think Sullivan also began to disconnect himself from the mission. His mission, as he understood it, as he acted, was to win games, to try to get into the playoffs with Sidney Crosby, with Evgeny Malkin, Crystal Tang, Erik Karlsson, so on and so forth. But Dubas, I should not talk with my hands so much, huh? But Dubas was playing a whole different game of chess. Dubas was, in fact, building towards something else. And when I really knew it was a problem, when I really began to see the incongruity of Mike Sullivan to the Penguins' mission, was, I suppose, early April. Sullivan and I had a couple of tense exchanges over the course of a few days. And the problem was both were softball-friendly questions. I asked about Tristan Jarry and his audition. I mean, Jarry is the guy who used the word audition, not me. So I asked Mike Sullivan about it, and he's like, he's not auditioning. What are you talking about? That's a media word, blah, blah, blah. So shortly thereafter, I asked Sullivan if the play of Ville Koivunen and Rutger McGroarty would, serve to give him some hope for the immediate future. I think you would agree with that, right? And he kind of shot back, that's for you guys. That's for the media to talk about. We're trying to win the game. So on. It's like, you're out of the playoffs. It's over. The fork has been stuck. The timer has popped out of the turkey's backside. The Undertaker is on the way. The hole's been dug. Work with me here. I'm trying to write some stories that keep the fans engaged, and this is something they want to talk about. I didn't say all of this, but this is what's running through my mind. And instead, he wanted to talk about beating St. Louis or beating Dallas or Colorado, whichever of the cities that was in. And that's, I think, when my switch flipped. Like, he really doesn't get it. He's not even thinking of what's going on here. He's out of lockstep. And yeah, I don't want to say I ripped Sullivan, but I certainly criticized him in the moment for passing on what should have been, a T-ball home run that I served up for him. And then Dubas's comments about complacency and stagnation. He didn't include Sullivan in the sentences last week, but he absolutely should have. And that's what I wrote over the past week, that maybe he wasn't the right fit I still didn't expect what we got Monday. Didn't expect it whatsoever. Credit Kyle Dubas. Absolutely credit Kyle Dubas for having the guts to go through with this. Because understand, within a week, Mike Sullivan will be an NHL head coach again, whether it's Boston, whether it's New York. Perhaps he waits to see what happens with Vancouver. Maybe Talk gives him a call and says, hey, I'm thinking about leaving. If you want this job, you probably have it. Wherever else Mike Sullivan might want to go, he can pretty much punch his own ticket, except Pittsburgh. He's, and the likelihood is he'll end up coaching a rival. He'll likely wind up in New York. How about Philadelphia? Wouldn't that be something? I don't think he'd take his buddy Torts' leftovers, but you get what I'm saying. There's a high probability that Dubas freed up a great coach to go coach a rival. And if Sullivan decides to take a year off, that means the Fenway Sports Group is still on the hook for that contract that was, what is it, $5.5 million per year that has 2 more years. I mean, if Sullivan wanted to, he could sit at home and just cash in. Boy, wouldn't that be tempting, huh? Hang out with the grandkids for a year. I mean, he has a new granddaughter, I believe. Grandson, was it? So be it. We're not going to get into replacements yet. That's going to be in the coming days. We are going to do a live chat on Tuesday, 1 p.m. I'm going to set it up as soon as I'm done with this. I have a special guest. Francis Anzalone, you for those of you who attend a lot of these, has been, early in the season, he was instrumental in really helping us break down the nuts and bolts of the Penguins system, Sullivan's changes. I suppose I should mention, as we talk about Mike Sullivan here all night, that I thought Sullivan coached his butt off into January. I thought Sullivan did everything possible from the start of the year into, let's call it, late January. The team made tweaks and changes, made lineup changes, but I think ultimately the second half of the season, the lineups were confusing to me. Absolutely confusing. Why Ryan Graves remained in the lineup over other potential defensemen. I mean, look, even Kolyachonok. You can't really say. I mean, he was kind of soft. I don't think he performed very well in the limited opportunities that he had, and you have to make an impact when you get the shot, full stop. Having said that, what was there to lose by letting the guy have more runway? He could not have been any worse. And you probably would have found out conclusively if you wanted to bring the guy back or not. But because of the limited ice time, I don't know that Kolyachonok, he remains an unknown to me. I think there's the incongruence, even within Mike Sullivan's own season, where he did really well. I mean, he was coaching his butt off, and then in the second half, it just all went to hell, didn't it? January and February were abysmal, miserable, awful, terrible months for the Penguins. I mean, it was borderline, if not completely unwatchable hockey. So I see some of you question. Nope, not doing questions. Come back for the live chat, 1 p.m. on Tuesday. As I was saying, we're going to have Francis Anzalone. Now, here's why you and I want to tune in tomorrow with this. We're going to do a live chat, but we're going to spend 15 minutes with Francis. Because Francis, I don't know if you remember Francis's resume. I mean, this guy is one of the best you've never heard of. Has coached internationally. worked his way up from being a scout in the USHL, coached in the NAHL, back to international, and is now running a hockey school and has tuteled some very big names, including some names you very much know and are rooting for. So Francis is on the inside. In fact, he's even been a guest coach of the Penguins in previous years. He is this very evening putting together a list of guys he would talk to for the Penguins head coaching job. He and I already discussed a couple of names. I bounced a few names off of him, and the first name I bounced, he's like, that's exactly who I was thinking of too, to start the process. I'm like, all right, I got one. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. He and I have some congruence. We have some intersection on our hockey thinking, except that Francis is a whole lot smarter than I am. So we're going to do that tomorrow. I just wanted to kind of invite you all in to this live video thing. So I think I've covered everything, because the stuff that Dubas didn't say was all about the lack of usage of young players. Like, why wasn't Owen Pickering just allowed to work through it? Why wasn't Kolyachonok put into the lineup? You know, I think Dubas picked his battles very carefully this year. He didn't force players on Mike Sullivan. He didn't force Ponomarev and Poulin or any of the, the fourth line youngsters on Sullivan. He let Sullivan have the best lineup to try to win, even after it became obvious there'd be no winning. Perhaps Dubas deep down knew what had to happen. And now the Penguins have a chance to get a head coach who will, in fact, prioritize the development of the organization and development of the team. I think that's an essential piece. Sidney Crosby will continue to play his butt off. He will carry the team. But they have to develop some of these youngsters. And that's going to be knowing which guys deserve a shot, knowing when to pull the plug, knowing when to sit them down, and when to let them ride through the rocky times. Because next year there's going to be some rocky times. So Mike Sullivan deserves full credit for a hell of a 10-year run, 9.5 to be exact. Couple of Stanley Cups. I thought he had a couple of teams overachieve. That 2022 playoff series still stands in my mind. If they beat the Rangers in 22, I think this organization is on a whole different path. Honest to goodness, I do. I think that Game 7 loss just mortally wounded the psyche of the team. They were never able to win big games after that. It just punctured the tires. So that is... Oh, good Lord. Okay, I told you I wasn't going to take comments or questions. I see someone from Facebook chiming in. Rumor has it Sid is not happy with the coaching decision. Not true. I don't know where you're getting that. Yeah, Mark Madden asked the question in the press conference, but I would be very shocked if, I'm sure Crosby's not happy. Crosby very much respected Mike Sullivan, but let's not blow this up into a Sidney Crosby is leaving because Mike Sullivan's no longer there. I mean, come on. Crosby's come way too far for that. Now, if they hire a bonehead who just, if they get the hire wrong and Crosby is like, this guy is an idiot, get him out of here, and Dubas is like, we're sticking by him, then maybe then we can talk about any Sidney Crosby trade rumors, early retirement, what have you. Only if and then. Crosby doesn't have to be happy right now, but I promise you, I guarantee you, Crosby will show up when it's his turn and time, and he will put the team on his back, and he will work with the new head coach, and he will give everything he's got. I think you know that, right? Okay, so that's it. I've done 30 minutes. This was not supposed to be that long. And yes, I badly need a haircut. I wasn't getting one in Wilkes-Barre. We probably should talk about that at some point too. But we're going to have a lot of videos coming over the next couple of days, report cards, prospect tee-ups, kind of talking about which prospects will be ready, what you can expect, so on and so forth. Tuesday, 1 o'clock, live chat. Like and subscribe to the channel so you get notified of said live chats. People are like, I didn't know it was coming. Well, subscribe to the channel. And follow me on X. All right, kids, have a good night. I'm out. Have fun.